Do badders, welcome to Bad Boy Running. We've got sometimes we have episodes which aren't necessarily a standard episode for us when we just think this is someone we have to get on. My wife and I are obsessed with World's Strongest Man. We have been since we were children. It's an absolute staple for us over Christmas and New Year. And our next guest came onto the scene, someone we hadn't heard of before, absolutely smashed everyone's heat, having not done strongman at all 2 years ago. And at one point in the whole of the strongman footage, someone mentioned he'd once done a marathon. I'm like, right, that's my excuse. This is my excuse to get Mitchell on the podcast. I'm doing it. So welcome to the podcast, who I genuinely think will be a future world's strongest man, Mitchell Hooper. Hey! How you doing?
Thank you. Yeah, really well. Thanks for having me.
Because we see, I don't know if it's similar in Australia, we only see World's Strongest Man on between Christmas and New Year's Day. And so for us, you are like, we've only just found out who the world champion is. Whereas obviously for you, that was 6 months ago. But how much of a roller coaster was that experience?
Yeah, it was wild. You know, I shouldn't have been invited to World's Strongest Man, all in all, because leading up to that, I had basically done 2 state competitions. I had done 2 state qualifying competitions. I did 1 online competition. And other than that, it was just Instagram lifts. So I asked Colin the day before World's Strongest Man, I asked what he was most excited about. And basically he said, I'm most excited to see if you're lying.
Have people gotten before then who have faked it?
No, but everyone who's been invited before, I probably had the least competitive pedigree of anyone in terms of caliber of competitions, and people fake stuff online all the time. And usually when they get invited to comps, they'll pull out or have a reason that they can't go or something like that. So I was definitely an anomaly in terms of really getting somewhere that I had no business being. And just making the most of that opportunity, really.
How does it work then in an online competition? How? Yeah, I mean, I can understand what like in person, but online, how does that operate?
So there's certain events that are fairly standard in strongman. So the online competition, this one was called Static Monsters, and it was 3 attempts for a maximum log press and 3 attempts for a maximum deadlift from 18 inches. So I pulled 485 kilos on the deadlift, and I overhead pressed 200 kilos, and then that was enough to win me the world title, so to speak. But it's really not the same as actually getting together in person, but they do their best, and it was during COVID times as well, so that's why I took part in that. Yeah.
And when you say people have cheated, do you have a sense of how they do that? Are they really big weights, but actually it's just small weights closer to the screen? Or are they like drawing
You've seen them
crossed
out the numbers and put another number in? That's like,
yeah. How do they cheat?
I don't really know, but you could do a couple of things. I mean, when you have a bunch of plates stacked against each other, you could have 4 or 5 of, say there's 9 plates aside and be a big deadlift. You could have 4 or 5 of those as 15-kilo plates that are just imperceivably thinner when they're all squished together, and then you still have to be very, very strong, but then instead of being 400 kilos, it's 350 kilos, and goes from being very impressive to the strongest guy in your local gym.
Because I mean, my mentality would be tempted to cheat just to go to the world champs and be thrashed by everyone anyway, because I'd just love to be there and be like, hey, it's the excitement of it all.
Something tells me if you and your current form were lifting big weights, they would know.
Yeah. We can test that, but yeah, it would be called out quite quickly. I'd love to go through actually your exact experience, because but let's before we do that, let's rewind so at least we can try and pretend this is linked in any way to running at some point. So have you run before is the first question.
Yeah, I ran 3 marathons between 2017 and 2018. 1 in 2017, 2 in 2018.
So you must, given how large you are now, you must have been like quite strong even then.
Yeah, in running standards, absolutely. Yeah, when I ran, I was about 105 kilos, and I mean, yeah, I was strong, but certainly, certainly miles off where I'm now. So, for example, when I was running, I could deadlift maybe 200 kilos, and now my best is 475 kilos. So it's miles apart. But yeah, I've always been on the stronger side. That's what I've tended to be good at, and I suppose that's why I'm a much better strongman than I am a marathon runner.
And what's your kind of like your background in terms of like what were you strongest at school? What was your kind of like the thing that you really excelled at and that you enjoyed doing?
In terms of like athletics growing up,
Yeah, yeah.
I played everything you could think of. I played hockey for 10 years at a rep level. When I was going to college, I had to choose between golf, D1 in the States, and American football in Canada.
What
Between golf and American football?
Yeah.
What?
And,
Wow. How did you get so good at both?
well, I played golf since I was a kid. And yeah, to be honest, I don't know. Golf is my favorite sport. I was out on the course yesterday. I love it. I absolutely love it. But I played as a kid and played in a couple of junior tours growing up, and won a couple of junior tours. And it's just something I really enjoyed to do. And yeah, I mean, I didn't really see it as a challenge to be really good at both. I think naturally my athleticism made me good at football. I'm not sure I was the best football player per se. I was just athletic enough to get away. And then lots and lots of practice on the golf course. But yeah, so that's when I was going to college. I sort of had those two choices. But in high school, it was basketball, volleyball, swimming, baseball, all at competitive levels. So I've really made my way around everything that we can do in Canada, like everything but cricket, basically. And then after I finished running, um, I went and before I ran, I did a bodybuilding show. So I went American football, stopped that, did a bodybuilding show, wanted to eat a heap and wasn't quite sure how to burn it all off. My mom's a marathon runner, so I thought, you know what, I'm going to give that a crack. Ran a few marathons, and my ceiling in that was much lower than I wanted it to be. And so I moved on to strength sports sort of serendipitously. But my education, my work is as a exercise physiologist. So I exercise people with injuries and chronic conditions. And so when I stopped playing competitive team sport, my attitude was largely that I need to experience everything that I ask someone else to do. And that started with running, and it's gone to strength sports, and that's just happened to take me where I am now.
Interesting. And out of interest, how far can you drive a golf ball then? Because you've got to be like Happy Gilmore in terms of the power.
My normal golf swing, reliably about 310 meters. But I do a couple of long drive competitions as well, and my best long drive is 400 yards, which is about 370 meters.
Yeah. Wow.
So,
and how do people react to you on the golf course?
well, I don't play much at all anymore. So anytime I play, it's with someone who's pretty close to me.
And so, because with the marathons then, because to me that would almost, from my understanding, is marathons and weights just don't go hand in hand together. It's running just burns off all your muscles, and this is what I'm told. Or it just counteracts everything you're trying to achieve if you're trying to get strong. So, were you just focused on running at that time?
No. And to be honest, the literature is a bit overblown in how you can't resistance train when you run. In fact, the only thing that's reliably shown is that if you want peak strength, you can't run. But if you want peak running performance, you still can lift weights and be fine. In fact, it has large roles in injury prevention and ability to recover. So I still lifted weights largely because I love to lift weights. I was in college, and at college, I don't know about you guys, but I had heaps of free time. I didn't find uni that challenging. And so I had probably 8 hours a day where I could train, I could recover, I could eat, I could run, I could lift. Great times, actually, thinking back on it.
We had 8 hours a day. but we didn't do that with it. It was mainly in the bar, I would say, but yeah.
lifting, but lifting the pints.
Different type, yeah. There's different type of athleticism. But the kind of the strength work that you were doing then, but but before you like running marathons, when you were running marathons, was that all strength work in aid of supporting the sports you were doing, or at that stage had you were you thinking, okay, I want to start bulking up now, I want to start getting bigger, I want to start working on that with a view to something else?
Since I started lifting weights, and that's been consistent since I was 16, I never did it for performance in any sport. I always did it.
Okay.
Recently, obviously, I always did it to try to get smaller, and I'd lift weights and it just get bigger and bigger and bigger, and it just didn't work. And so at some said, you know what, I guess we're gonna have to run with this.
and at what point then did you suddenly think, actually, this is getting beyond just me being good at this for myself, and I could actually start to compete and start to challenge in a national level?
Yeah, well, I won the New South Wales state title, and when I did that, it coincided with World's Strongest Man, which I was not a strongman fan growing up. I didn't really know much of the sport a few years ago, and I looked at the numbers that the guys were doing at Worlds, and I thought I could do that too. Simple as that. If I committed enough to it, I could do it as well. The funny thing is, when I moved from Australia back to Canada about 6 months before Worlds, I didn't have an invite to anything, and there was no strongman community where I was going back to. So if I didn't get invited to Worlds, there was a reasonable chance that I would have quit strongman and gone on to the next athletic endeavor, which is, look, now I'm at 7 international podiums in a row after World's Strongest Man, and 3 of those being victories. life could really take.
What's that? So how does the structure work then in terms of how you kind of work your way up to World's Strongest Man? Then does it have like regionals and then in nationals and yeah? How does that? Is there kind of, is it the same structure in each country, or does it depend on the territory?
One of the beauties of strongman is the lack of structure across the board, and it's
right.
It's a good thing and a bad thing, really. But the traditional way to get to World's Strongest Man would be you do a qualifier for what's called official strongman games, which is essentially amateur world championships. If you finish on the podium at official strongman games, you're then invited to Giants Live, which is the stadium tours in Europe. At Giants Live, if you podium, that's your invite to World's Strongest Man.
Right. Okay.
So it's still it's quite far away then, isn't it? Even if you win the amateur one.
Yeah, because then you still have to go to a pro show and you still have to podium at that to get to Worlds. Now, this year, there's probably, I would say, less than a third of the field has actually qualified for Worlds. Otherwise, it's just invites to who they think is most deserving. And I wasn't invited to World's Strongest Man when they sent out the first invite. Someone got hurt and I was a reserve. So I found out about 3 weeks before World's Strongest Man that I was going to be an actual competitor.
And with that first one that you entered, what's kind of the process for that? Do you think, okay, I'm going to go for this? Like how did you know about it, find out about it? Is it a poster in the gym? Do you want to try out these things? Is it knowing people? Is it like criteria where they, you've got to be a certain size or anything else like that? Just if you could just take us through that first kind of competition, because we never hear about, the kind of the first steps into this.
Well, powerlifting is a bit more, it's less popular, but it's a bit more accessible than strongman. So I went to, when I moved to Australia, I just wanted to find a gym that was in an industrial park, sort of a little bit grungier. I just enjoy working out in that environment. So I found that, and those guys did powerlifting. I started doing powerlifting. Fast forward 6 months, I won the national championship in Australia. I got really bored with it because powerlifting is just squat, bench, and deadlift, and the combination of the 3. Other guys did strongman at that gym, and they were egging me into it, basically saying, like, you're a waste in powerlifting with your background in running and how you could move and how you're agile and how you recover well. And so then I tried strongman, and that was just getting stuck into the community, getting out to the comp. and having a group of guys to train strongman around. And that's really what has stuck me to the sport more than anything, is that from the bottom to the top, everyone is so kind. Everyone is really welcoming. And it's a really comfortable place to be, because really, I think if you think of running and strongman, we're basically polar opposite ends of the spectrum. But in your area, the barrier to entry is so low. All you need is a pair of running shoes, and you can get out there, start doing a little bit. But there's a fitness base that's required to actually be able to start running. No one wants to go out and run 200 meters. Where on our end, if you have someone large and unfit, they could be fairly good at strongman fairly quickly, and they could get stuck into it. And that's the community where a lot of people are. It's not that they've played a heap of sports and they're looking for the next sport to kill. Really, they're looking for a way to get moving in a way that's comfortable for them. And being around people like that it's really inspiring to me, and it really creates a really good, healthy community.
And one of the things you said there, sorry, Dave, just want to carry on with that. Like, one of the things you said there was, they said to you, "Oh, you've done running and everything, and it allows you to move in that way." So, is your background like pretty unusual then in those spaces, in the sense that you have that kind of that multi-sports, that exposure to all of those different things, whereas a lot of other people have just lifted, and they're quite kind of limited in really their exposure to other sports in their past?
Well, I'm certainly the only person who's been to World's Strongest Man who's also run a marathon. But the guys who are quite good, I sort of, in the sport, I distinguish people between strongman athletes and strongman competitors. And you could have strongman competitors who are very, very strong, but they're not strongman athletes. Where athletes, they've played a bunch of other sports, they understand really basic things like efficient triple extension, like agility, like speed, like ability to recover. And those are sort of the two groups of guys that you have in the sport, which is why you'll see someone like me when, like, I don't have a big belly on me. I'm not 200 kilos, but I'm still up there with the best in the world. And it's really interesting because obviously there's benefits and drawbacks to each. But all of the strongman athletes, and when you go watch a show, the guys who run around and move well, all of them have come from some backgrounds: American football, rugby, basketball, all those types of things.
And out of interest, where does strongman fit within the Australian and Canadian psyche? Is it something that is well known by most individuals in the country? Is it watched on television, or do people experience it in different ways to how we might in the UK?
No, it's actually crazy. In after I did Worlds in Canada, we were able to watch it a couple of months before you, and the production of it was really unenjoyable, in my opinion. Then when Christmas came around in the UK, we got a VPN and we were watching it, and I actually loved it. The broadcasting, I thought that was really interesting. I thought they did a great job. So no, it's not part of the culture the same, but I don't think it takes that much to change that. I think if Eddie Hall was Canadian, you definitely move the needle quite a bit on how popular the sport is in Canada versus the UK. But it's also a matter of the guys who have done really, really well to promote there in the UK, the Giants Live guys who run World's Strongest Man. And if we have people with that ambition in North America, I definitely think that the sport could grow and the sport could take off. But when I'm at home, people will recognize me from the news or from the paper. But for the most part, not a big deal. When I'm in the UK, one of the most wild moments for me was after our show in London at Royal Albert Hall. It was just me and my mom on that trip. So we went and we're looking at Buckingham Palace. And we're looking at Buckingham Palace and people are like, "Oh, are you Mitch Hooper? Like, can I take a picture?"
Did the Queen run out? Was it that? That's interesting, because there's always been good Canadian world strongman athletes and Americans especially. So you'd think that, I mean, you've got Corona at the moment as well, and actually there's loads of Canadians, like, and you'd think that actually there wouldn't be that many good world strongman athletes if there wasn't that culture. That's why that does surprise me somewhat.
Well, there's a lot of good strongman athletes from Canada, but in the past 24 years, there's been no Anglo Canada's Strongest Man winner. For some reason, they've found the most French people in the entire country.
Yeah, they have. They really have.
So I think JF he might come back, but he had a big injury last year. He might be done. But you got JF Caron, you got Maxime Boudreau, you had Jimmy Paquette, you had Hugo Girard, and all of these guys are so French, and that's pretty unrelatable. Country, it's quite a dichotomy, and so hopefully I can move the needle a bit on getting it more popular in English Canada.
Is there a reason why you think it's more popular on the Canadian side, or is that just coincidence?
On the French side, you mean?
Yeah. Oh, sorry, on the French side. Yeah. So
honestly, I think it's just momentum. You got a couple of guys who are really good, and that inspires other people, and they open a gym, and people want to train with them, and on and on and on. But yeah, that's really it. And a lot of what we do, you have to continue to fight what people have done in the past as your barometer for what you're capable of. When it comes to running, you've got Eloy Chipko. What's his name? Eloy Chipko.
Yeah. Anyway, Kipchoge.
Perfect size. He's got the perfect proportions in perfect conditions. This is what he could run. And maybe a guy will come along and best his time by 15 seconds. But you're getting to the point where you're improving very small. In strongman, we're really not. We're going up and up and up and smashing records. And so sometimes as people, we need a reference to say, oh, well, this guy who lives down the road has done it, so I can too. And it takes a pretty strong mind to go, there's nobody around me who's accomplished anything of this nature, and that's what I'm going to go do. All right, so I think that's part of it. And just to wrap up the North American thought, well, there's been really good American strongmen. In America, it's not like the UK where you have an appetite for things that aren't the most popular and the best and the biggest and all that. So you've got the NFL, the NBA, the MLB, and the NHL. And now we have soccer going as well. Outside of those 5 leagues, you wouldn't find any other professional sporting league where people make a good income. Where over there, you'll have 4 or 5 soccer leagues, and if your town happens to have a second-tier team in the league, the whole town still goes out to support. Where us, we could have the best feeder team for any pro league. We're like, oh, well, it's not the pros. And so even though we're the strongest men in the world, it's not the most popular sport at the moment. So I think people would tend to follow other things. But it just needs better exposure, in my opinion. And to me, the only things that matter in terms of titles are the fastest man in the world who wins the 100 meter and the strongest man in the world who wins the world's strongest man. Otherwise, someone who doesn't know marathon running, for example, you can be the best marathon runner in the world, and then you have to explain a marathon is the distance between marathon and Athens, and we run 42.2 kilometers. It gets so far away. So I think there's a huge appetite for this being appealing to the masses for that reason. So hopefully we can get it.
I love how you've already elevated yourself, should you win strongest man, to being Usain Bolt, then everyone else ever in sport. I
think you're right though. I do think you're right though. When people do think of like something like running, it is the 100 meters, the fastest. It captures your imagination and so on. And I do think the strongest. I mean, something being the strongest or the biggest is always captured imaginations throughout history, hasn't it? I mean, that's the thing, isn't it? You said something there though about how there are like marginal gains in terms of running, and someone comes along and beats Kipchoge, think it's only going to buy a few seconds. So do you think then that actually the strongest man and the limits of what's happening at the moment, that there's much bigger gains to be made, that it's still at a point where we haven't really kind of scratched the surface of some of the strength things, especially in the running world. A few years ago, we were talking about this at the running show at the weekend. A few years ago, it was the idea that you could run a marathon and then run a marathon the next day was crazy, until people came along and started, they could run like 150 marathons in 150 days, and completely blowing out the water what the human body is capable of from a running perspective. So, but you're thinking in terms of in strength, that there's still so much more to be explored.
Yeah, I think it's as simple as, if you just graph how any lift has progressed over time, it's still trending up and up and up. So yeah, there's a lot more to be gained. It's just less established, really. And
In what way? So can you give an example then of that? Just so for because we don't really kind of understand. We know how that happens in a running perspective, but like in terms of like the amounts people are deadlifting or benching and things like that. How kind of has that? How quickly has that gone up?
Well, when Eddie Hall did the 500 kilo record in 2016, the record before he did that, like directly before, was 463 kilos. So he beat the record by 37 kilos in 1 year.
10% almost. Yeah.
Incredible.
Yeah. Like you could look at that and you could say he is that great and that unbeatable, blah, blah. But I really don't believe that to be the case, because now there's the number of guys who have lifted more than 463. There's probably 5 people, including myself. So he's just showing people what's possible. It's sort of, I would put us at sort of the 4-minute mile mark where like people go, okay, right. And in terms of competitive strength sports, it takes a lot to do, where I think you could get to a level with running where you could be at a very high level without compromising a lot of elements of your life, and without people, things like your family. A lot of people's family wouldn't support, where you go, okay, look, I'm going to be 150 kilos and lift as heavy as I can, and my biceps going to come off at some stage, and so is my pec, and it's what I want to do. And they'll go, okay, well, I hope it's worth it. And up until very recently, if you won, say, Europe's Strongest Man, your prize money was about $2,000, and you're like, keeps getting better in the sport. I think you're going to see draws of more people. And if you took every guy, say, in the NFL and every guy in professional rugby, and you said, I want you to train strongman for 3 years, whether I would still have a spot at World's Strongest Man is definitely in question, because I bet there's some animals out there.
And what do you think? What do you think it is that's driving those performance gains? Then is it science, better understanding the body, nutrition, or is it pure mindset?
No, if you look at the guys who did World's Strongest Man, and say when it started in the 80s, I believe it was the 80s, but they were maybe 120 kilos. And when a sport's only 40 years into it, and those guys, for example, Atlas Stones, the Atlas Stone run in the original set, I believe the heaviest that they did on the final stone was 120 kilos. And now it's 205 kilos for us. And there's equipment improvements, there's a bunch of things that go on there, but you learn and you're like, okay, if you're heavier, you will be stronger. If you have more muscle, you will be stronger. So now we are all larger than any of those guys in the past. So I don't think it's purely mindset. I think it's partially that people are dedicating more of their time to it. And also, if you think of a sport, so if it was on TV for the first time, let's say in the 80s, to be able to have people, and this is where CrossFit's just getting to right now, if you have people who grew up and that was their sport, so to speak, that's going to take 15 years for that to actually come out. And so we might be in the second generation of people right now who have, and that's sort of how I see it. We're in the second wave, and say soccer, we'd be in the 20th wave, 30th wave, and running started eons ago. So it's definitely still
even with the Stoltman brothers, you could almost see that half a generation step where just having the experience of his older brother there to guide him through, and suddenly this an even bigger beast arrives.
Yeah, absolutely.
So how do you go then? So you're very good at powerlifting. How do you then step to the level where you're like, right, I now am good at running with a car chassis on my shoulder, or I can now pull a truck? And actually, it's always something weird. Like I could now lift in a circle a wheel of cheese, or I could carry a barrel of wine. That, like, there's always some absolutely whack thing that in my head as a viewer, you can't practice in any way. Like, how do you practice whackery, if anything?
You got to just take movement patterns. And in every strongman comp, let's say a standard 5-event comp, you got a deadlift, an overhead press, a carry event, Atlas stones, and likely some sort of grip event. And if you can get good at those 5 things, generally speaking, the best person at those 5 is going to win the show. But and basically, you get strong at all, and it actually replicates the fundamental movements of life, where those are squat, hinge, push, pull, and carry. Right? If you can do those, you'll be a good strongman. So you train those, and then you sign up for a comp, and then that comp has something ridiculous, and then you just make the most of it. Like that's really all you do. So, for example, here they have what's called the unspunning stone throw, which is a historic Swedish event. And essentially, you have a 10-meter run up and an 82-kilo stone, and however you'd like, you throw that stone. They do. Often they hold it above their head and sort of like give one of those when they get to the end. And they try and launch it from straight arms above their head. There's other ways to do it. So now we get a sandbag that's 80 kilos and try and figure that out. But then on the day, you still have to look at the stone, feel it out, and there's still some variability there. So it's quite interesting in that way, how we have to, we really have to figure it out.
And do you say, because at the World Champs this year, there are a few things that happened that it reminds you that not everyone actually knows what they haven't really thought it through to the level you'd expect. So one of the ones was on the lift of the bars. People took their shoes off so they were closer to the ground, and then they were burning their feet on the asphalt because it was so hot in Sacramento. You're like, wow, you never would have thought about that in practice. But then things like the train pull, the difference in technique of someone like Brian Shaw, who's clearly a rehearsed athlete, and he'll go tight and lean in and really, and yet I think he did worse than Luke Stockman, who had, in my mind, not the greatest technique. So are you having to constantly watch old World's Strongest Man episodes and just almost second guess what could come up and then try and think of how your body can be used in different ways?
Not necessarily until after the events are released. And once the events are released, yeah, you'll go back and you watch everything you can and try and learn and speak to different people and whatnot. But yeah, it's challenging. But that's where the deadlift one, the first group of guys went out, and that happened to the first group. And personally, I went out to the floor because it was 100 degrees outside and it was on a black mat. So I thought it's a useful exercise and seeing how that feels on my feet. I learned that it was going to burn my feet before I went out there. But the first guys who do it get a pass in my mind. But then everyone else, you just saw that happen to the other guy. And you'd have guys going in the last group who are still making the same mistake. So I think that's a bit where psychologically you can't get too nervous or hung up in the moments or anything like that, because it's very easy to get in your own way. And the guys who didn't put shoes on because it was World's Strongest Man, if they saw their mate burning their feet in training, they very easily just put shoes on and not think twice about it.
Well, so when you basically decide, oh no, I'm going to move over from powerlifting to World's Strongest Man. I mean, how does that change your training? Is it a case of like, all the guys that are training for like World's Strongest Man type go, oh, come with us to a secret part of the gym where we've got a load of Atlas stones and other things, or I've got how because there's a huge door that they have to open.
Exactly.
No, with a train behind it or something. Like how does that work? Or do you start with a little tiny Atlas stone and work your way up? Like it's just how does that kind of that transition in training work?
Well, powerlifting is a great base for being able to do strongman, because if you're a strong squatter, that carries over to lots of things like your push presses, even like your deadlifts and different versions of deadlifts and whatnot. But yeah, you sort of first and foremost, you got to learn to own whatever movement you're doing, and it takes a while to learn how to do it properly. And there's a lot of nuance to things that seem very innocuous, like a deadlift. There's probably 15 different things on the deadlift that you have to get right to be able to deadlift big, and learning that's a challenge. And you have to be very careful to not exceed in load what your body's capable of in technique. And the challenge then is, if you're a fairly strong person who goes from powerlifting, where your bench press is horizontal, and you could put a lot of load over your head with a log,
but you don't know how to control the log. You don't know anything about it, and you're headstrong. That's where you see a lot of guys get injuries. And so my background in exercise physiology has really helped me manage that over time and scale up intelligently.
Now, diet. Let's talk about that. I mean, the stories we heard of Thor and how he'd I think eat 16 whole chickens a day, which you always debate the story. Well, you always doubt the stories somewhat because they sound so hyperbole. But how did you change from not worrying about weight to actually trying to get strong? What does your diet then look like? And does your diet change almost during your training cycle in the build up to something like World's Strongest Man and then afterwards?
Yeah, well, it was really not that different when I finished running because you're eating so much to recover from the running to make up those calories. So when I finished running, I was about 105 kilos. Then I worked my way up in powerlifting to about 120 kilos. And now I'm about 140 kilos. And that's over the span of 4 years. Now, the thing that you notice when people talk about in my sport, talking about eating a lot, often that's people who aren't built to be the world's strongest man, who are trying to eat their way there. And sometimes it works, and that's okay. But from my perspective, I've gained 35 kilos in the span of 4 or 5 years. And I know plenty of people who have done that accidentally. So it's, I mean, it's about 5,500 calories a day for me. In terms of eating into competitions, traditionally speaking, you're going to get heavier as you go into a comp, but there's little challenges around that. For example, the Arnold America is in about 5 weeks' time. It's the first week of March, and that is a really, really heavy show. And traditionally, Worlds is lighter, and so it's a benefit to be lighter body weight at Worlds, to be faster, more agile, better fitness. And so you eat more going into the Arnold's, probably lose a few pounds going into Worlds, and manage it that way.
And what would the diet look like? What's the mix of carbs, protein, veg, other things?
Well, protein, it's basically 2 grams per kilo body weight. So at the moment, it's about 300 grams of protein. Some guys will go up to say 400, 500. But to me, it's not practical or useful. In terms of energy sources, we're using creatine for the first 5 seconds of movement. So supplementary creatine is really important. Then we go carbohydrate from 5 seconds to 2 minutes. So carbohydrate has to stay relatively high, and a relatively lower amount of healthy fats compared to the traditional diet.
And what foods, what are your favorites? Where do you get your protein?
Can't really be picky, can you? Definitely protein shakes. Try to do it less, but practicality says that it's sort of what has to be done sometimes. Then I have a meal prep sponsor, so I'll have chicken, I'll have steak for my meals in the middle of the day, and then dinner's fairly normal. So if you followed me around eating for a day, I don't think you'd really be that in shock and awe. And I think the vast majority of strongmen are that way, and they don't eat no one eats 16 chickens. No one.
That's so disappointing, isn't it?
I mean, it might have been the mountain rather than Thor, but it might have mixed my stories. And do you still enjoy food? Because actually, I asked John Barbender, John Clark, about a question to ask you, and he'd said actually that one of the things he struggled with was with his just his body image and how it was his body was changing and how people saw him, and that can be linked to food as well. Like, has it changed? Have you had any issues with what you're eating? Do you still enjoy food? Have you had any issues with just how people perceive you and your own self-identity?
Yeah, probably not to the extent of self-identity, but we all want to look good, of course. And when you've done a bodybuilding show, for example, you sort of have a pinnacle of how lean you could get. And even when I was getting ready for that show, I still thought I was too fat for that. And I look back and I was about to die. I was so like gaunt. And so I think it's tough. But the important takeaway for me is that the feeling hasn't really changed from when I was super lean to when I was running to where I am now, in terms of like, oh, I think we'd all like to be a bit leaner. I think we'd all like to look a bit better. And if you rely on emotion to determine that for you, then it's going to probably be a losing battle anyway. But the biggest challenges with being large and having a lot of muscle, particularly because I try to be a fairly approachable guy. I got the best compliment the other day, actually, where someone's like, "Oh, are you Mitch Hooper?" I'm like, "Yeah," and they go, "I knew I recognized that smile from somewhere." I'm like, "That's." But people have these, like, it's almost like a pregnant lady, where people feel like they have a pass to touch you when you're.
I want to touch you, Mitchell. I've got to say, I want to touch you all over, and I'm married.
People will come up, and people you don't know will like grab my shoulders, like traps, and you're like, oh, it's
something
a bit much.
There's something innate about it, though, isn't there? There's something that I think when people can see like someone who's a huge slab of muscle, it's just people are like in awe of it, aren't they? It's like a statue or something like that.
You couple that with the fact that to make the most of the time in the sport, you have to put yourself on social media, put yourself out there as much as possible. And so people know what you look like. For me, they know my family. They know what I like and I don't like. They know my personality. They know my struggles. And then they see you and you've never seen them in your life, but they feel as though you're friends and that they can interactions, overly friendly interactions. So those would probably be the sort of the struggles involved in terms of size and perception.
I'd say
what about things like injury and stuff, like, so because you were talking about there about, you know, people not knowing like range of movements and things like when they first go into it stuff. And of course, you with your background in multiple sports and stuff, obviously you've got, you know, range of a range of motion and movement that other people maybe don't have a base in, stuff like that. Do you have to temper your, you know, the weight work with other things in order to make sure that you've got the balance in your body? Do you do stretching? Do you do anything like that in order to kind of help avoid injury?
There's a continuum between stability and mobility. And the more mobile you are, the less stable you are. So in our sport, it essentially asks you to be as mobile as required and no more. So if you can get up above here, I don't want to be able to have my arms go all the way back, because that gives a freedom that go very well. So the traditional, I would want them to be able to get their arm all the way back. And like, if you're going up to reach for a can of soup back there, it's not too hard. It's stuff like that, like as much range of motion as possible. But there's no way in which you're going to be able to control 200 kilos if it starts traveling back behind your head, for example. And really, when it comes to injury risk factors, the number one thing is, what have you done in the past and how much have you scaled it up to get to where you are now? And that's the biggest thing to manage in terms of injury risk.
And one of the things that has always struck me about the World Champs is it feels as if the organisers really have the power to almost crown the winner by their selection of what the events are. That's how it feels as a viewer. Is there that sense among the community as well that it can be skewed heavily towards certain athletes?
There's a correlation between how far down they finish in the table and how much they feel it was skewed to someone else. I
can gather that.
You know, it could partially be that it favors someone, but you take the best guys in the world in, say, someone like myself, Alexei Novikov, Martins Lisis. For us, you put any events out there and we're going to be pretty good. And that's what makes a great strongman. So Tom Stoltman, the biggest knock against him in our community in terms of an athlete is that he came 7th at the Arnold's 2 months before he won Worlds. And then people see him win Worlds, he's unbeatable. But he's actually very beatable with the wrong set of events. And that's where guys like Brian Shaw and Zadrunas and Mariusz Pudzianowski, and these guys, it didn't matter what you put to them. And so the onus is really on us as athletes to be the strongest that you can in every implement. And it's sort of dogma. You can sort of, by where people live in the world, you can sort of predict what they're going to be good at, because that's just what they tend to practice in those countries. So in America, they love overhead press for some reason. In the UK, they love deadlifting. In Eastern Europe, they love deadlifting and moving events. And that's what they tend to practice. We all have the same genetics, really. I think I'm 95% Scottish and Irish. But in Canada, we tend to be good with grip events, and we tend to be good at things like arm over arm. It's really quite random. But yeah, the onus has to be on us to be good at whatever they throw at you. And then my attitude towards, well, they can tailor the events to the winners. My attitude is, well, be favorable enough that they'll tailor the events to you.
Is it a case of? Is it a case of? You say they were kind of like there were certain strengths or the certain things that people prize. Is it a case of when you come to decide how you're, how you're going to spread across different events, that you think I'm going to work hard to be really good in these things that I'm already strong in, and try and be really, really good in those to the exclusion of others? Or is the aim to basically focus most of your training on your weaker events? Like how do you kind of balance in order to make sure that you are, you bring the right set of strengths to a competition?
Yeah, that's one of the biggest challenges as an athlete is you can't tie yourself to a certain lift or a certain individual variable, because let's say you think you're a great deadlifter. That's one of 5 events, and if you can't overhead press, and that's going to be in every show, you'll never win. For example, there's the Canadian guy who's he'd be top 10 in the world right now. He is a phenomenal athlete, one of the best in the world, but he can't deadlift very well. And he'll finish last or close to last in most deadlifts, and deadlift is in every show. So he hasn't won a major international strongman show for that reason. And
so he's got a weakness in just one event, and that's kind of holding him back.
A guy named Mateusz Kieliszkowski, and he, again, it's deadlifts, big challenge for him. When Thor was at his best, they were at the Arnold, and Mateusz won, I believe, 4 of 5 events and came close to last in the deadlift, and Thor beat him, even though he won 4 of the 5 events.
Wow. Yeah, that's crazy.
But you tend to want to practice the things you're good at, and that's what you have to fight. You can't go, I'm a great presser, and you do that 3 times a week, and there's nothing to be gained. If you can deadlift 1,000 pounds and that wins the event, there's nothing to be gained from being able to deadlift 1,100 pounds.
Oh yeah, true. So you might as well max. You don't want to max out. You want to just do enough to win. Now I want to take you to your when you were qualifying. Your qualifying, you came in first overall. You were absolutely smashed the field. How did that feel? Like, were you expecting that?
Yeah, I was actually. I sat with Colin Bryce the night before, and I explained to him I was going to win, and I don't think he believed me particularly. But if you sort of, in hindsight, you look at the guys in my group and what they were strong at, what the events were, I would have been heavily favored. But I don't particularly care about winning things. I think it's a nice byproduct of what you're doing. But if you just rely on winning things, it leaves too much to chance in terms of injury and events lining up and the right guys turning up, and you don't get gastro the night before and all that stuff. So just trying to take it all in stride. And I very firmly believe if you have an overt positive feeling when you win something, it's going to be matched by large negative feeling when you lose something. So I don't really allow myself to get all that excited about winning or doing well from an athletic perspective.
And how was it received by the other athletes? Because someone coming from an internet competition to suddenly actually looking like they could win the whole thing does actually take a bit of a hit to some people's egos.
Yeah, but that's just not the culture. Like it was entirely positive from the guys there. And I think a part of that is drawing a delineation between confidence and arrogance. And I think confidence is your belief in your ability to do something, and arrogance is your disbelief in your inability to do something, where I could full well admit I'm great at this and great at this, but I'm also not great at this and not great at this. And there's other guys here who are incredible. So trying to maintain that that attitude, I think, was probably most important.
And in terms of when you look ahead, you've had an incredible season since the Worlds. Do you think you're in your head be going into the next World Champs as a potential favourite, and what are you aiming for? If you to look back in 10 years' time, what would you be happy with what your expectations are and your ability right now?
Yeah, I think I'd be one of the favorites. I think if the winner isn't myself, Tom, Trey Mitchell, or Alexei Novikov, I think a lot of people would be very, very surprised. So I think we would be the four going in that you sort of look at for who's going to make it there. But in terms of the expectation and the pressure I put on myself, I just return to it's not about winning for me. And if it is, you're going to be disappointed at some stage. So I'd be very happy if I represented myself the same way I did this year.
Amazing. Well, any other questions, Jody?
No. I think we kind of. It's really interesting. Having watched it for so many years as well, and just seeing like the difference in different people. And I just go back to the question about this. There was always some people that had like really big strengths, and then they kind of fail on other things and things like that. And then there would be some people who were just like incredible at everything. And you just always wondered, like, just how do you even like get into it, or how do you even like learn to do those things? And so it's just been like incredibly insightful just speaking to you about this, because it's just like thrown open a whole window on something that, like you say, for us it's always like a Christmas thing, isn't it? It's always strongest man at Christmas. That's just throughout our entire life, constant.
Yeah, and I think in some ways that it's such a lovely place in British people's hearts, because it is associated with family and holiday and have you figured out a good chant for yourself, kind of a good Usain Bolt type move if you win, or a kind of a great nickname that we can cheer on next time?
Phrase, yeah, you need something like that.
My nickname is Moose, so you'll notice if you watch competitions, it'll sound like when I'm doing something that people are booing. That's the Moose thing. But I try to remove myself from sort of the circus side of strongman, and I think it's more important who you are than what you do. And if I can put more focus on who I am than what I'm doing out there, then it's going to be able to get me to my goals better than winning competitions anyway.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast, and good luck in everything this year. And if there's anything we can do to help with your endeavours, let us know. And if you're ever passing through London, let me know, and I'll go out and I'll buy you 16 check-ins and just see how far we can get into those.
We're at Royal Albert Hall in July, so if you want to make your way out to that, let me know.
Oh my God, I do. Yeah, right, I'm going to pick it now. Fantastic. I'm picking for me and my wife. Amazing. Well, thank you so much for that, Mitchell, and hopefully see you in July.
Sounds good. All right, thanks, guys.
What a lovely guest, and interesting. He's saying that he doesn't want to focus on victories or focus on.
That's what someone who's winning everything says, don't they? That is the kind of thing that someone who's going to crush everyone says. It's like, I'm not even thinking about winning. I'm just thinking about total domination. I'm just thinking about being the best I am. The best I am is totally dominating this sport.
Yeah, and I hadn't actually known either that Luke hadn't won. He'd done so badly at the Arnold a few months before was strongest man. And the Arnold Classic's obviously a massive one in just general strength. So it does show how different the two sports are. And the fact that they put a weight for that and then reduce it down for World's Strongest as part of their circuit.
Also, like the idea that you want to restrict your mobility in order to be more stable. I mean, that's really interesting. I mean, that is so counterintuitive, but it makes perfect sense when you consider the things they have to put over their heads and everything as well.
Yeah. And I did think that people would potentially practice more the weird things like the pulls or the other techniques, and maybe they do when it comes to the world champs, because they're told the specific things. Maybe they build their own rigs to practice on.
Because the thing is, I remember when you watched like Strongest Man through the years, there'd be competitors in there who were absolutely rubbish. They'd be rubbish at everything, wouldn't they? They'd be so oh yeah, so and so from Britain, and they'd be rubbish at everything. But they get to one and they'd be incredible at it. Go, well, this one's his specialism.
Yeah,
like what's it called? The tossing some
was
weight.
the caber or
yeah, exactly like that. They do like, and then they were incredible in that, and then they went back to being last at everything else.
well, that like if you look at someone like Mark Felix, who's he's 53, I think, incredible at quite a few events, but he just hasn't got that complete package. And I think he's still got for holding the pillars. He's still the strongest and the best in the world, and he will destroy everyone else. It's just amazing to watch. But then, if you're him and you're at that age, it's probably more fun, right, to be the person who's the best at a couple of things. You're always going to be invited to everything, rather than to try and even it out and
be
just
fourth
not
at
be
everything.
Yeah, or even lower down, and then suddenly you're not going to be invited. And but really do balance. What do you think of that? Because it almost seems like it's not been that hard for him to get there, which is incredible, right? I mean,
not hard to enter World's Strongest Man.
Yeah, I mean, he's just so naturally talented. And actually, during the episodes, go back and watch them if you haven't already. Too bad. They're really good on Channel 5, and it's really funny because Dally Wallace is one of the commentators, and he brings he loves Strongman, and he's obviously very, very entertaining. But Colin Bryce is brilliant. Like the whole thing is really well executed. And
it was really good. The thing is, they're always in really good locations most of the time. And then one year they'll be somewhere really shit, and it's normally when they're in the UK. They'll be like, it would be like,
it's never in the UK. It's always it's always somewhere lovely to go to.
I'm sure I watched one, and it might have just been Britain's Strongest Man or something like that. But it would be like, Kuala Lumpur. Then it would be, like somewhere in the Caribbean, and then it would be somewhere in America, and then the next one you'd watch, and it must have been Britain's Strongest, and it'd be like Wrexham or something like that. Just like, and they'd all be really gorgeous places, and then one would be like a car park in Wrexham, and so but it must have been Britain's Strongest Man. If it was never, why is it never in Britain then?
I think they want to have it somewhere.
They want it to be nice.
They know it's not going to rain, and because all the events are outdoors, and that makes the atmosphere. But also, I'm sure it's a business where they'll take the event to places that will pay to have it there for the advertising. So it's a place like Botswana. It's in Sacramento at the moment. I think it's somewhere else.
Saudi next.
Yeah, it could well be. I mean, probably too hot in Saudi, but somewhere similar. And but it's even in the heats when you see it, he said he was going to win. He just knew I guess the difference thing is, I suppose you know your strength, right?
I think that's it. You don't. It's not as if
it's not like football where you can't tell how good you are at.
And there's lots of different factors. Like the circuit, don't you? I mean, you're going there with all the people around you. It's not as if you've got necessarily someone popping out of nowhere, who's been training on their own in some facility in East Germany or something like that. Everyone kind of knows each other, and you probably know your relative strengths before you even get in there. Everyone will have an assessment of who do well in, and the fact he's already saying who he thinks the top four are going to be. It shows he's thought about what the events are, and therefore favors them. But I can't wait to watch it next. That's the thing. It's going to be 6 months after it happens. Can't wait for it 6 months after it happens. Yeah,
and we've already looked at the dates. I think it's in April this year, and I've already looked at the dates and said to Briggsy, we've got to make sure we don't listen to the radio the day after, so that we don't find out who's won by accident, as I did last year. But D-Banners, what do you think of that? If you want us to interview any other people or talk about any other topics and have guests from specific topics, then message me, david@badboyrunning.com, or message on Instagram, and we will go out and get them. And if you'd be kind enough to review us, it really helps our credibility and getting future guests on. So what would the keyword be for today?
Atlas Stone.
Atlas Stone. Try and get Atlas in there somehow as the review, and we'll read it out. Anytime you get a cheeky word in, we'll read those reviews. And Jody?
Yeah, I was going to say, if you want to share your powerlifting or World's Strongest Man training plan with the rest of the Do-Badders, feel free to join the Facebook group. Just go to Facebook, type in Bad Boy Running Podcast, answer 3 questions, and pop it in there. If you want to buy some merch, head to store.badboyrunning.com and buy yourself a lovely red piece of merchandise that you can show off at your next race.
And if you like this episode, other episodes I recommend. We spoke to John Clark, who's British. He was British strongest naturally strong man. I can't remember what the exact term was. Who then went to
British strongest naturalist.
Strongest naturalist. Yeah.
Now that would be a competition.
Yeah, you're pulling that truck with. But he then went to running, I think, 48 marathons in 48 counties in 48 days. So from strongman to MDS, just incredible story. We've also spoken to 2 people, including Hardest Geezer, about setting world records for pulling a car over a marathon distance. So both those episodes, 2 different. Who was the name of the individual for Australia? That was a really good episode where he was overweight, partying hard, and then went on to setting a world record. Really, really good story. So those are good episodes as well. So I'd seek those out if you enjoyed this one. Well, thanks for listening, guys, and we will chat next time. See you next time.
See you later. Bye.
Fuck you, buddy.